Hello, my name is Max Acker de Oliveira, and I will be presenting my case brief for Toscano vs. PGA Tour for my final exam. The issue at stake is whether the individual officers and directors of the Tour and various sponsors of the Tour's golf tournaments conspired to restrain trade in senior professional golf in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Rules associated with the case. Section 1 of the Sherman Act prohibits every contract combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce. Jeanery Incorporated versus James Jeans in 1988 said that the interpretation of the phrase above requires, quote, the concerted action of more than a single entity. Monsanto versus Spray Right Surf Corp. 1984 decision that held that a local sponsor dealing with the tour do not rise to the meaning of concerted action. Antitrust law. 1986. If one's reason for controlling certain conduct are very strong, the court should err on the side of over-inclusiveness. Polk Brothers versus Forest City enters in 1985. Joint ventures or systems of distribution all require extensive cooperation and fall under the rule of reason. Matrix Essentials versus Emporium Drug Mart, 1993. Rejecting the defendant's defense, despite the existence of a contract between the plaintiff and its distributors, in which the plaintiff unilaterally established the non-price restraint challenged by the defendant. American Airlines vs. Christensen, 1992. A contract between airline and members did not independently set the terms under which the airline would offer travel rewards. Datagate vs. Hewlett-Packard, 1995. Concerted action requirement is satisfied when the sales force coerced by sales. System Care Incorporated vs. Wine Labs, 1997. Contract between a buyer and seller that satisfies the concerted action element of Section 1 of the Sherman Act. OSC Core vs. Apple Computer, 1986. Dealer complaints followed by termination are not enough to provide sufficient proof of an antitrust conspiracy. Isaacson vs. Vermont Castings, 1987. Complaints to a supplier made by competitors of a dealer who is cutting prices below suggested levels are no evidence of an agreement. Matsushita vs. Drugs Antitrust Litigation, 1999. Plaintiff must show that the inference of conspiracy is reasonable in light of the competing inferences of independent action or collusive action that could not have harmed them. Volvo North American Corp. Versus Men's International Professional Tennis Council, 1988. Because joint ventures consist of multiple entities, they can violate Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Analysis. Harry Toscano played golf as a professional since 1962 and spent 22 years on the PGA Tour. After 30 years of playing professionally on the PGA Tour, he sustained a shoulder injury in 1996. With limited motion, he was effectively limited in the tournaments he could compete in until 1998 and fully healthy. Toscano argued that the PGA monopolized the market and limited the ability of golfers to play competitively, thus dampening their careers. The Tour's rules and regulations provide for a 78-player field for each tournament. There are board members comprised of players from the Tour, as well as player directors and independent directors that help enforce rules and regulations. They hold considerable power that provide them the ability to allow or disallow events to be sponsored by the Tour. Outside of this board live the local and national sponsors, whom Toscano contends conspired with the Tour to perpetuate and enforce rules and regulations he is challenging in court. Sponsorships within the PGA Tour fall into two categories, local and title. Local sponsors, quote, serve as the organizers of tour events and are responsible for reserving a golf course, arranging for the sale of concessions, end quote. Title sponsor makes payments and assumes financial responsibility for a portion of the tournament in exchange for incorporating their name, displaying signage throughout the tournament, providing hospitality benefits, and secures national media deals. Section 1 of the Sherman Act requires concerted action of more than a single entity. Jeanery Incorporated vs. James Jeans showed that because local sponsors and title sponsors have different relationships with the Tour, they are exempt from the Sherman Act section. Monsanto vs. Spray Right also affirmed the right of a manufacturer to announce the terms under which it will deal with distributors and then refuse to deal with those unwilling to accept its terms. In the court's eyes, a conspiracy should not be inferred. Toscano argues that Monsanto applies because, quote, the relationship between the tour and local sponsors is analogous to that between a manufacturer and its distributors. The court did not agree with this. Toscano's second argument is, quote, the notice and comment procedure. This points out that before the board makes a final vote on any amendments to the rules and regulations, it holds, quote, notice and comment, end quote, procedure in which both sponsors may take part. Even though this is in the rules, it is supported by very little evidence in the history of the tour. It was undisputed by Toscano that no representative of the sponsor defendants has ever sat on any board. Their ability to write memos that the tour may or may not agree with is also not a strong enough argument to say that their actions are analogous to manufacturer-distributor relations. Further, there is no evidence that any sponsor ever commented on the particular rules challenged by Toscano to sway the tour's opinion. The third and final point Toscano looked to do was present evidence that showed, quote, the hypothesis of collusive action is more plausible than that of individual action, end quote. The record showed in court that, quote, there was a lack of concrete evidence that the local sponsors held specific views about the rules and regulations targeted by Toscano, that those views, if any, were communicated to the tour, and that the tour relied on these putative views in adopting or amending its rules, end quote. Conclusion. No, Toscano did not show adequate evidence showing an inference of conspiracy that overshadowed a competing inference of independent action. Thank you for your time. Thank you for a great semester. Peace.